There's no one-size-fits-all approach to creating a successful fundraising strategy and plan.
People are nervous, right? It's a big deal. We're raising $10 million, even if we're raising $1 or $3 million, depending on the size of the org.
Major gift fundraising is not deadline driven. It really is probably the only type of fundraising, along with planned giving, that is not deadline driven.
AI comes on the scene that's affordable, accessible, that can provide insights and personalization at scale.
That's the first core element of this fundraising engine or funnel, is making sure that the top of your funnel, the beginning of your fundraising process, you are in front of the right people.
What do the people we serve need? And how do we open the door to help them get there?
What happens a lot of times is we get this discomfort or this fear, and our brain tells our body to stop.
We can acquire donors and we can automate everything. And that's where I worry, at least personally, around the perils of AI, that it would remove humans from the interaction.
This is the Intentional Fundraiser podcast.
Picture two nonprofits, both hosting an event this spring. The first invites leaders from 3 different cultural communities to sit on stage during the program. They get a nice introduction, a round of applause, and a photo for the annual report. Nobody calls them again. 6 months later, not one of them has given a gift, and one tells a mutual friend the whole evening felt like being used as a backdrop. The second nonprofit takes a slower path. A major gift officer spends 4 months simply getting to know the elders in a community her organization serves, with no ask attached at all. She shows up to a cultural festival. She sits in folding chairs at a community meeting. She asks questions and lets silence sit instead of rushing to fill it with her own words. When she finally invites one family to consider a gift, they say yes within a week, and they bring 2 more families with them the following year. Same goal for both organizations, completely different posture, completely different result. Welcome to the Intentional Fundraiser podcast. I'm Tammy Zonker, and today we're talking about inclusive major gift fundraising, not as a campaign theme, not as a single event with a diverse photo lineup, as a daily discipline that shapes how you build relationships with every donor, especially the donors whose culture, identity, or lived experience differs from your own. By the end of this episode, you'll understand why inclusive fundraising has become a core major gift strategy in 2026 and beyond, not a side initiative for the communications team. You'll know the common missteps and tokenism traps that quietly push diverse donors away. You'll have practical language for building authentic relationships across cultures and identities. And you'll understand the internal work, the representation, language, policies, and power dynamics that has to happen for your external outreach to feel believable instead of performative. Let me say one thing clearly before we start. I am not here to hand you a script that works on every donor regardless of their background. That would be its own kind of disrespect. What I want to give you instead is a posture, a set of practices, and enough self-awareness that you can build the specific, individual relationship each donor deserves. Let's start with why this matters so much right now. The donor base for major gifts looks different than it did even 10 years ago. Wealth is being created and inherited across a far wider range of communities, cultures, and family structures than the donor pyramid most of us were trained on. Immigrant entrepreneurs are building generational wealth. Women are controlling a larger share of household giving decisions than ever before. LGBTQ plus donors are giving openly and expecting their full identity to be welcomed, not quietly tolerated. Donors of color are leading family foundations. If your major gift strategy still assumes a single cultural default, a single family structure, a single way of expressing gratitude or making decisions, you are already missing donors who are ready to give significantly, not because they don't care about your mission, because they don't feel seen by how you're asking. Here's a frame I use with my clients. Inclusion in major gifts isn't a values statement you put on your website. It's a revenue strategy and a relationship strategy at the same time. Every donor you fail to engage authentically because your outreach assumes a different background than theirs is a donor you've left on the table, often a donor with real capacity. I worked with a university foundation a few years back that kept wondering why their alumni of color gave at a fraction of the rate of their white alumni, despite similar income levels. When we look closely, the donor materials, the campus stories featured in appeals, the volunteer leaders pictured in every brochure almost all reflected one demographic. The message wasn't intentional exclusion. It was a default that nobody had questioned. Once they diversified who told the story and who was asked to lead, giving from alumni of color increased substantially within 2 years. Same mission, same need, different invitation. There's also a generational piece here. Younger major donors across every background are watching how organizations show up around equity and authenticity. They're far less forgiving of organizations that perform inclusion during a campaign and quietly abandon it once the gift closes. A donor who senses that your commitment to inclusion is a marketing layer rather than an organizational value will notice, and they will often give elsewhere or give less than they could have. So here's the shift I want you to make. Stop thinking of inclusive fundraising as something separate from major gifts work, something handled by a diversity, equity, and inclusion committee or a single staff position. Inclusion is major gifts work. It's part of how you identify capacity, how you build trust, how you steward relationships, and how you retain donors for the long term. The organizations getting this right in 2026 are not doing one diversity campaign a year. They're building it into how every donor conversation happens, every single week. Now let's get tactical. I want to walk through the missteps I see most often and what to do instead. The first trap is tokenism. This shows up when an organization invites someone from an underrepresented community to a visible role, a panel, a photo, a board seat, without any ongoing relationship or shared decision-making behind it. The person becomes a symbol instead of a partner. You can usually spot tokenism by asking one question. If this person said no, would anything about our actual strategy change? If the answer is no, you're not practicing inclusion. You're decorating with it. The fix is shared leadership. Before you invite someone to represent a community on your behalf, build a real relationship with them first. Ask what they want to be involved in, not just what role would look good in your materials. Give them real influence over decisions, not just visibility in a photo. The second trap is assuming instead of asking. I see fundraisers walk into a donor conversation with assumptions about what someone from a particular background will care about, want to be called, or expect from a relationship. You might assume a donor from a certain faith tradition wants their gift framed a certain way. You might assume a same-sex couple wants to be acknowledged a certain way in your materials. Sometimes those assumptions happen to be right. Often they're not. And the donor notices the gap between who they are and who you assumed they'd be. The fix is curiosity over assumption. Ask open questions. How would you like your gift recognized? Is there anything about how we've described this program that doesn't sit right with you? Who else in your life or community do you think should be part of this conversation? Then listen closely to the answer, even when it surprises you. The third trap is treating language as decoration rather than respect. This shows up in small things that add up. Using outdated terms for a community, mispronouncing a donor's name repeatedly without asking for help, using pronouns incorrectly and not correcting course, translating materials word for word instead of culturally, so the words are technically accurate but feel foreign or even offensive to a native speaker. The fix here is simple but takes humility. Ask donors directly how they want to be addressed and referred to. Write it down. Train your team to use it consistently. If you're translating materials, work with someone from that community, not just a translation tool, to make sure tone and cultural context land correctly. The fourth trap is the one-time engagement. This is the single dinner, the single Cultural Heritage Month newsletter feature, the single diversity ask that never turns into an ongoing relationship. It signals that the relationship was about a moment, not about the donor. The fix is consistency. If you engage a donor or a community leader meaningfully once, plan the next 3 touch points before the first one even ends. Inclusion has to look like an ongoing rhythm, not a single calendar event you check off. Let me give you a do that ties all of this together. Slow down your timeline. Authentic relationship building across cultural or identity differences often takes longer than the relationship building you're used to, especially if your organization hasn't done this work before. That's not a problem to fix. That's the actual work. The major gift officer in our intro story spent 4 months with no ask. That patience is what made the eventual yes feel earned instead of extracted. And here's a don't I want to leave you with. Don't outsource this work entirely to one staff member who shares an identity with the donor you're trying to reach. I've seen organizations hire a single person of color, a single bilingual staff member, or a single LGBTQ plus team member, and then expect that one person to single-handedly fix years of disconnection with an entire community. That's not inclusion. That's a setup for burnout, and it tells the rest of your team they don't have to do this work themselves. One more trap worth naming, because I see it constantly around year-end appeals and heritage months. Organizations will run a special campaign tied to a cultural or religious observance, feature a handful of community members in the appeal, and then go quiet again for 11 months. Donors from that community absolutely notice the calendar pattern. It tells them the relationship is seasonal, tied to a marketing moment, not a year-round value. The fix is to spread your engagement evenly across the calendar instead of clustering it around the month your communications team associates with a particular community. If a donor's culture or faith matters to your relationship with them, it should show up in how you treat them in March, just as much as how you treat them during whichever month your marketing calendar flags it. Let me also give you a quick do around language access. If a meaningful share of your donor base speaks a language other than English at home, don't wait for a donor to struggle through your materials before you offer a translated version, and don't rely on a translation tool alone for anything emotionally important, like a gift acknowledgement or a tribute message. Pay a native speaker from that community to review the tone, not just the grammar. The difference between a technically correct translation and a culturally fluent one is often the difference between a donor feeling welcomed and a donor feeling handled. Here's the piece a lot of organizations skip, and it's the piece that determines whether your external outreach feels real or hollow. You cannot authentically invite diverse donors into your mission if your internal team, board, and policies don't reflect any of the same effort. Let's start with representation. Look honestly at who sits at your decision-making tables. Your board, your leadership team, your major gift committee. If none of those rooms reflect the donors and communities you're hoping to engage, donors will eventually notice the gap between your outward invitation and your internal reality. This doesn't mean tokenizing one new board member and calling it solved. It means building a real pipeline and genuinely sharing power, not just adding a seat at the existing table. Next, language. Pull up your case statements, your gift proposals, your website, your donor recognition materials. Read them as if you were a donor from a background different than the one those materials were clearly written for. Do the examples, the imagery, the stories all point toward one cultural default. Small language choices, the names used in case study examples, the family structures assumed in planned giving materials. the holidays referenced in your stewardship calendar. Communicate who you imagined as your donor when you wrote them. Then, policies. Look at your gift acceptance policies, your donor recognition guidelines, your event practices. Do they accommodate different naming conventions, different family and household structures, different religious or cultural considerations around money and giving? A donor who has to awkwardly correct your paperwork or your seating chart is a donor who is doing labor your system should have already done. And finally, power dynamics. This is the deepest layer and the one that takes the most honesty. Who really gets listened to inside your organization when a donor or community member raises a concern about how something was handled? Whose feedback gets acted on quickly and whose gets quietly filed away? If staff or board members from underrepresented backgrounds have raised concerns before and watched nothing change, that history shapes whether your current inclusion efforts get believed internally, let alone externally. I worked with a nonprofit where a Latina staff member had flagged more than once that a major donor's preferred recognition framing didn't match how the donor's own community understood generosity and legacy. Her feedback sat for over a year. When leadership finally revisited it alongside her, the shift wasn't just better donor materials. It rebuilt trust with that staff member, who had started to wonder if her voice mattered at all. Internal authenticity and external authenticity are the same muscle. You cannot build one without the other. Here's a practical starting point. Pick one internal system this quarter: your case statement, your gift acceptance policy, your board recruitment process, and review it specifically through the lens of who it was built for and who it might be quietly excluding. You don't have to fix everything. You have to start somewhere real. I also want to name the discomfort that often comes with this work, because pretending it isn't there doesn't help anyone. Conversations about representation and power inside a staff or board meeting can feel tense, especially the first few times. Someone may feel defensive. Someone may feel unheard. Again, that discomfort is not a sign you're doing something wrong. It's often a sign you're finally having the conversation that should have happened years ago. Bring in a facilitator if you need one. Go slowly, but don't let discomfort be the reason the conversation never happens at all. Let's bring this together. Inclusive fundraising in 2026 is not a campaign theme, a single event, or a job for one staff member who shares an identity with the donors you hope to reach. It's a daily discipline of curiosity, listening, and shared leadership, backed by internal work on representation, language, policy, and power. 3 key takeaways to walk away with. 1. Tokenism happens when someone gets visibility without relationship or real influence. Shared leadership is the fix. Build the relationship first and give people genuine say in decisions, not just a seat in a photo. 2. Curiosity beats assumption every time. Ask donors how they want to be seen, addressed, and engaged. Then listen closely, especially when the answer surprises you. 3. Your internal work has to match your external invitation. Representation, language, policy, and power dynamics inside your organization either support or quietly undercut everything you're trying to do with donors outside it. Your challenge this week: choose one practice to start and one practice to stop. Perhaps you start asking every donor directly how they want their gift recognized. Perhaps you stop using a case statement example that assumes one cultural default. Pick one of each, write them down, and tell one colleague so you have a little accountability. This work is slow, and it's worth it. Every donor deserves to be seen as a full person, not a representative of a category. Start with one relationship and one honest conversation this week. Thank you for being here. Thank you for the work you do. The world needs fundraisers willing to slow down, listen first and build relationships that honor the whole person in front of them. Keep transforming your fundraising so you can transform the world.
The Intentional Fundraiser podcast is a Fundraising Transformed original. I'm Trent Thompson, executive producer, CMO, and head of community at Fundraising Transformed and the Modern Institute for Charitable Giving. The Intentional Fundraiser podcast has been recognized by FeedSpot as one of the top 80 fundraising podcasts on the web. This recognition means so much to us, and it wouldn't be possible without your incredible support, encouragement, and thoughtful engagement. Every listen, share, and conversation has helped us grow and reach more passionate fundraisers like you. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to review and rate it 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, and be sure to follow or subscribe wherever you listen. For resources mentioned in this episode and to subscribe to our Scaling Major Gifts newsletter, visit fundraisingtransformed.com.